All right, you guys. So the next thing we're going to do is work towards making objects look 3D through shading. Okay, shading happens through value. Okay, so basically, when you look at an object, it's kind of showing where the light is. When we've been doing all this really detailed observation, right, the last week, if you look at where the light and the shadows are on the object and you try to put them in the right place, you create something looking 3D. Okay, so you have to be able to create a high range of values. Okay, value, when we talk about that, put this the right way. All right, so when we talk about value, that is just basically the different shades, the different amount, like between light and dark, that you can create. Okay, so in a sense, if we take from white to black, we can create, this is just 10 different values. Okay, you can see how you go from white to slightly less white, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, all the way to as dark as we can. Okay, so you can do it with pen, you can do it, you know, with paint and watercolor, but you guys are going to be doing it with your pencil. So a quick review on your pencils. Okay, your 2H pencil is your lightest. Okay, your 6B pencil is your darkest. So if you are trying to make your lightest area, if you use your 2H pencil and use very, very light pressure, okay, you can get a really, really light value. Same thing is if you want your darkest area, you switch to your 2B pencil or 6B pencil. This is the same amount of pressure. I'm barely touching the page. You can see how the 6B pencil is automatically darker because you can barely see that on the paper right now. And then the other variable is pressure. So you don't necessarily want to be doing this, but I can go from this to a nice steady pressure where I'm still not digging it and etching it. I'm not etching this into the paper. But you can definitely see I went from that to that with the same pencil, just with pressure. Okay? So, as you are learning how to shade, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to just use a basic 2B pencil. Okay? One thing that people tend to do is come and start shading like this. The scribbly lines are not going to give you even areas of value, and your eye won't really accept that as, you know, a 3D object. It's going to start noticing the white gaps in between it. Okay, so your first thing you have to do is practice the shading technique. Okay, you do want to use start with light pressure, and you do want to kind of go back and forth here. All right, and kind of get to where you can make a uniform area. So before you do anything else, it's good to just kind of practice this. And then once you kind of get the hang of that, then you think, okay, like how do I do that with a slightly darker pressure, or heavier pressure, to get a darker value. Okay, so then I go here and then I push down a little bit harder and I start getting a darker value. Okay? So this is step one. First, avoiding the scribble. And second is, as you're doing that, trying to be able to control the pressures so you can do a darker and a lighter value. Okay. A couple people have asked about sharpening pencils and things like that. One thing is that you really don't want like a sharp point. Sharp points sometimes do that etching in. You also don't want to do this. Okay, that works sometimes, but what happens is on some pencils, when you start doing that back and forth, it ends up really like, I don't know, stucco-y looking. I can only think of it as like a house texture. Okay, so you can see how that texture right here, okay, that's a little bit different, that versus that. It's a little different, so just be aware that that happens. All right, we're going to get to blending, you know, later, but let's say that you do this and it's really kind of scribbly. A lot of times people think, okay, that's a little scribbly. Guess what I'm going to do? Guess what? you just now look like you have fuzzy scribbles. Did not fix, okay? So don't think that blending, you do have a blending tool, but a lot of times people use their fingers as well. Don't think that that's gonna solve bad technique, okay? Okay, project. You are going to make a value scale, okay? So basically you're gonna do this. You're gonna aim for 8 to 10 different values, okay? If I'm using a 2B pencil, I can get quite a few values just out of that. So don't feel like you have to use all 5 pencils, but basically you could do 2 values, like a light pressure and a darker pressure of each of your different pencils. You kind of achieve it. So what shape does this have to be? If you want to, you can just go basic. You can just do a long rectangle, okay? Don't make this too small. So this, you can kind of see, it's maybe like about 1.5 inches, okay? And then this is a regular sized paper. You guys have bigger drawing pads, so don't feel like you have to add. This is just like regular 8.5 by 11. So, you know, it's probably about like maybe 10 inches. That's just a regular kind of starting point. So you're gonna go from white to your darkest, okay? If you're trying to do 8 to 10, feel free, you can take an a ruler, you know, and if you want to kind of just say like, all right, here's white, here's gonna be the next one. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Perfect. Okay. What you're gonna practice is going and making it seamless. What do I mean by that? Okay, I mean that it shouldn't look like where you have one value like this, and then the next value is really, really obvious. You shouldn't have big jumps between one value to the next value. You gotta try to transition smoothly. So, like we said, you gotta kind of practice, get a good, you know, practice getting in a comfortable shading motion. And then, see, I caught an edge on my pencil that I did not like. There's a rough part. Okay, so if I'm going from here and then just slightly heavier pressure, so I'm just barely going from one to the next. Okay, when you look from here to here, you can tell the difference. Beware of going back over an area, and maybe you're like, oh, I'm just going to work on this transition. Beware of the overlapping, because that'll automatically make it darker. Okay? All right, word of advice. Most people either go way too light or way too dark. The jump from white to not so white is one of the harder ones. So that one you definitely want to switch and have your 2B pencil, or 2H pencil. H. Okay? Because going from here to here, you got to really just barely be touching the paper. Barely, barely touching it. Okay? I'm not too concerned at this point if you're going all the way to the edges and filling the box. Okay? We'll work towards that. So let's say some of you are going to be uncomfortable doing the light, and some of you are going to be uncomfortable doing the dark. But just think, if you take your 6B pencil and you use your darkest, you know, heavy pressure where you're not etching, but you're working it into the paper, maybe that's your starting point. Maybe this is where I know this is the darkest I'm going to create, and then I can start easing up from there. Okay? If it helps, this kind of a thing is pretty easy to Google. Okay? So you can kind of think, all right, is that too big of a jump? Then you kind of measure up and you say, maybe I need another one in between there. So then it's easy enough to add a little bit more pressure, not as much. Okay, so it's easy enough to go back over and overlap areas. So maybe my first 2 boxes are kind of more like this. Can I come along here and fill this in? No. Can I do this? Definitely, but beware of that overlap. Okay. Another trick that sometimes people like to do, we talk about this when we get to like faces and softer shading, but there's also a shading technique where you kind of go in circles. Okay. There's a little bit of overlap involved in this, so sometimes you just got to kind of be aware of that. But, you know, if I want to come in here and kind of do a little bit of a circular motion to like add that in and blend it in, then I can kind of cover up those extra parts. Okay. So then I can kind of work this into the whole thing a little bit. Okay, so keep going. You're going to do a value scale. I had said what size does it need to be, or what shape? About, you know, like I said, you know, about this size. It'll be on the details of the project, but you know, roughly about this size. But shape-wise, if you want to make it like snake around, you know, and like make it more fluid, that's fine. Beware of, you know, some people try and do this where they make like a big heart, and then they go from like the darkest to the lightest, from here to here. Beware of big areas to shade. This, about an inch and a half wide, is a good amount. Like, as this beginning pencil stroke of just back and forth here is a lot easier than going back and forth over a big area. Okay, sorry, went off the page. Okay, so your project, you're going to make a value scale from white to dark. Use all your good shading techniques. Experiment and get to know your pencils. And once we get smooth shading, then we can move on to making objects look 3D. All right, next video, we'll see you.